My name is Catherine. I'm currently 34 years old, and I've been living with my mother at our family home since my father passed away 3 years ago. I chose to stay at home because I felt it was too risky to leave my mother alone. So, I've been living at home for these 3 years. During this time, the worst kind of people paid a visit to me and my mother. These awful individuals were none other than my real brother, Bob, and his wife, Jane. I've known my brother since he was born, and Jane, his wife, was a classmate of his since middle school. They've been dating since then, and Bob would bring Jane home every vacation, so I got to know her too. To put it bluntly, I can't forget these two. To be honest, they used to bully me just for fun. Both my parents were busy with their jobs, so it was pretty common for them to be absent on weekends. However, when they weren't home, that's when the worst time would start. Our family home, which we've been living in, is a rather spacious mansion built by my father, who was a CEO. But as soon as I was told to play hide and seek in this mansion and I got inside a closet, my brother and Jane immediately filled the closet with stuff, blocking my way out. I was often stuck in the closet until just before my parents returned home, and would frequently get scolded by my mother for messing up the inside of the closet. However, since my mother only worked in the mornings, she came home early one day and saw Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was furious as if she was on fire. From then on, I was never locked in the closet again, but the harassment from the two never ceased. I hated my parents for not being at home when I needed them. Of course, I resented my brother and Jane, but I also felt spiteful towards my parents who wouldn't help me. However, when I reached middle school, for some unknown reason, Bob and Jane shredded my school uniform with scissors, scribbled all over almost all my textbooks with pens, and cut them with scissors. They even ruined my cushions and beddings. I later learned that the two, who were high school students at the time, got bad grades on their final exams and were pissed off from being scolded by their parents. That's probably why they took such a horrible revenge on me. I was dumbfounded in my tattered room. Why am I experiencing such a thing? Why won't anyone help me? I stood there, lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to the dining room even at dinner time, my mother, who came to call me, saw my room and screamed. Upon hearing her, my father also rushed in. My brother, who came in last, was struggling to suppress his laughter, and occasional chuckles slipped out. To my surprised parents, I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." As soon as I said that, tears started to overflow. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. My toys, my study tools, and my clothes are all ruined. I don't want to live in such a house. I hate both of you, Dad and Mom. You guys won't help me. Perhaps it was the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Until then, I had been silently enduring and crying quietly even when things were tough. But then, I cried out loud like a child. Seeing me like this, my mother hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything until now." Even my brother, after seeing such a scene, seemed to realize the gravity of the situation and tried to run away, but my father grabbed him by the collar. "Do you realize what you've done? This is a crime." Although my father didn't yell, his low voice was scary even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Ah, crime, that's an exaggeration. We just played a bit too much. Destruction of property is a crime. You understand that you need to compensate for it, right? But Catherine is family. And I'm a minor. Minors can't be criminals, right?" My father sighed deeply at my brother's frivolous words. "Indeed, a minor like you doesn't have the ability to pay. However, it's the parents who clean up the mess. If you can't compensate, we will have to. We also bear responsibility for raising you this way. I think it's time you go live with your uncle." Huh? This uncle was actually my father's younger brother. He was a stern figure who absolutely despised dishonesty and was feared by all the neighborhood kids, kind of like a boogeyman. He was nice to well-behaved children like me and the other kids, but he had no tolerance for pranksters like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along well with this uncle. "No way! I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I won't do this kind of thing anymore. I've heard that too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet. When you two chased Catherine around. When you threw bugs at Catherine, knowing she's afraid of them. Each time we learned of your actions, we scolded you and you always promised to never do it again. But you did it anyway. We can't keep someone who hurts our family at home, even if they are family. Never set foot in this house again. With that said, my father took Bob by the scruff of his neck and dragged him away. Later, I found out that my father and mother had been angry at Bob's behavior. However, even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to understand why he was being punished. He just continued his annoying antics against me. He must be beyond help. That's what I decided to think. There are idiots in the world who don't understand the most basic rules of society. I learned this from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to some university on our father's dime after finishing high school. However, our father told him, "Someone like you will just end up hurting others even in university," and so Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after graduating from high school. However, it seemed like Bob desperately wanted to escape our uncle's place as soon as possible. As soon as he finished high school, he rented an apartment with Jane, who had also just finished high school, and they wanted to live together. They started their cohabitation life with the understanding that neither our parents nor uncle would help with rent or living expenses. And then, for some reason, Bob asked me to lend him some money. At the time, I had just entered high school and was not working part-time. All the money I had saved up, which used to be stolen by Bob when he lived at home, was fully reimbursed by my father and mother, as I had written it all down in a notebook. So, I did have the money that I had diligently saved up, but I had no intention of handing it over to him. To Bob's request, I replied, "Aren't you ashamed to be asking your high school sister for money? I'm not even working, so I don't have any extra money. There's no way I'm giving you any." After that, I told both my mother and father about Bob's attempt to borrow money from me, and they were angry and promised that they would not provide any further assistance. I thought that Bob and Jane should live on their own without relying on others. Since then, I have worked hard and went to college. I studied diligently in college as well, and after graduation, I joined a company where I continued to learn new things. I was so busy with my own life that I had completely forgotten about Bob. But just as I had forgotten about him, an invitation to his wedding arrived at our house. The bride was, of course, Jane, with whom he was living. Oh, so those two are finally getting married, I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should attend the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He was always a fragile man, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so both my mother and I panicked and called an ambulance. At that time, I reached out to my brother, but he replied, "I'm about to get married. Don't call me during this crucial period of my bachelorhood." Even when I told him that our father had been urgently hospitalized, he brushed it off, saying, "He just tripped, didn't he? Make sure to come to my wedding." With that, he hung up. Not long after, our father passed away. Given the circumstances, a wake and funeral were inevitable, so my mother and I informed my brother that we wouldn't be able to attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we come, my mother and I decided to remain absent. We also informed Jane's parents about our father's passing and our inability to attend the wedding. Although Jane's parents understood our predicament, my brother and Jane said, "You guys not coming to the wedding is so disrespectful. I suppose the term rudeness was coined for people like you. We put in a lot of effort for our wedding. Are you trying to ruin it?" The words that were left on my mother and I's voicemail were so absurd that it made me want to ask who the real rude person was here. While my mother and I were busy conducting the funeral smoothly, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without giving a second thought to our father's death. From then on, my mother and I never mentioned it, but we felt our relationship with my brother had been completely severed. But, out of the blue, my brother showed up at our doorstep. When I opened the front door in response to his "I've got a delivery" over the intercom, there stood my brother and Jane. I was caught off guard as the monitor only showed silhouettes. As soon as I opened the door, my brother and Jane, carrying large luggage, barged in, pushing me aside. Hey, what's the rush?" I protested. It seemed that my brother had completely forgotten the words of our father, who had once told him never to step into our house again. The two of them, who had brashly entered the house, put down the luggage they were carrying in the hallway and started talking nonsense at me. "You and Mom should leave this house immediately." "What? Isn't Mom diagnosed with dementia? This luxurious mansion is not suited for someone like her and a loser like you who never improves. This kind of mansion should be taken over by glamorous people like Jane and me. So, you guys should leave right away." "What?" I was stunned. What on earth was my brother talking about? After 3 years since our father's death, he hasn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything at all, and now he's asking for the mansion. Furthermore, while presuming that our mother has dementia, he's planning to evict her? I was left speechless. Then, our mother emerged from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's going on?" As my mother peeked out and saw my brother, she said something unbelievable. "Oh, who might you be? If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. Hearing this, my brother and Jane laughed mockingly at her. "See? This is how she is every time we call her. Her dementia must be getting worse. I'll leave it to you to take care of Mom. You can have Mom. I'll take the mansion. After all, I'm the eldest son, so it's only right that I get the mansion." With that, my brother walked deeper into the house. Moreover, Jane, imitating Bob, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and get out. I never want to see you again." I rushed to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" After that, as if we were being driven out, my mother and I left the mansion. Leaving all the old furniture behind, my mother and I took our belongings and fled the house. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who heard about our situation, offered us his house, saying he was abroad and couldn't take care of it. Originally, his cousin was taking care of the house, but since he's going to be transferred to another state next year, it seemed like perfect timing since there would be no one to look after the house. Upon arriving at the house and setting down our luggage, my mother and I finally felt at ease and took a deep breath. Then, my mother said with a laugh, "We've left that house, and I still don't like the way Bob and Jane act. Maybe we should sell the house." She said it outright. I asked my mother the question that had been on my mind. "Bob said you have dementia, Mum. What's that about?" "Oh, that. About 2 years ago, I started getting frequent requests from those two to lend them money. But they didn't even come to their father's funeral, and they never contacted me afterwards. I just couldn't comprehend how they had the nerve to ask for money. So every time, I pretended not to know them and said, 'Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right? Oh, I see.'" It seems that Bob and Jane misunderstood my mother's indifference and disregard for them, treating them as strangers because she didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. They mistook this as her genuinely forgetting who they were. That's why they thought she had dementia. In any case, I think it's wrong to evict someone you think has dementia. My mother immediately decided to arrange for the sale of the mansion. We'd been talking about selling the overly large mansion since our father passed away, and we were living there just the two of us. At that time, one of the executives from my father's company, where I am now receiving training as a successor, asked me to sell him the mansion if we were planning to sell. So, the buyer is pretty much decided. All that's left is to go through the formalities. When I talked to a real estate acquaintance and explained the situation to the executive of the buyer, they agreed that if we left Bob and Jane alone, the house would be in serious trouble, and something needed to be done quickly. And then, a week later, my smartphone rang incessantly. My mother's phone was the same. There were many calls from Bob to my mother's phone, and from Jane to mine. They both probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes, and we just enjoyed our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us noticing, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered the call, Jane exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer immediately? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over. Wait. Didn't you two take over the house? I think we're the ones who should be saying that we've been taken over, I responded. No. Bob and I took over this mansion, but now strange people have come and are demanding that we leave. They just barged into the house and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over, she exclaimed. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to tell her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about taking over, but you're not even the legal owner. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to a new owner. So, strangers who have no connection at all should quickly move out." What? She sold it? This mansion? But this mansion belongs to Bob, she responded in shock. When did anyone ever say that? I asked. Well, no one said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't this house, this property, and his dad's company eventually going to belong to him? And I'll be living elegantly as the wife of the CEO in this mansion. Despite all of that, Jane was frantic. I burst out laughing again. The fact that she thought that just because he was the eldest son, he would automatically receive the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father used to run was astonishing. Such naive thinking. Given Jane's staunch belief, Bob probably also believed that he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Again, I laughed at Jane's words. Bob as a CEO? You as a CEO's wife? How can you even dream of such things? You're both still working as low-level employees at the company where you first got picked up, without ever studying to succeed the business. She probably didn't expect to be ridiculed. Stunned by my words, Jane retorted, "What? In that case, I'll inherit the company from Uncle." I laughed even more. You should at least check your company's personnel announcement. As for my uncle's company, his cousin's son became the president last month. What? So, there's no way for Bob to become CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife? Jane was in disbelief. That's correct. Can I hang up now? I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore, I replied. Wait. Please, Catherine, give us some money, Jane pleaded. Well, goodbye then. I ended the call. I later heard from Uncle about what happened next. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion. They clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It seems that since they were hired by Uncle's company, they have been undergoing a strict education, and they were so scared that they cried as Uncle took them away. It was decided that they would be left at a mountain retreat of one of Uncle's acquaintances, because they were too unpredictable when left on their own. They've been warned by Uncle that if they don't straighten up at the retreat, they won't be able to leave the mountain for the rest of their lives. Despite this, they've tried to escape multiple times, but they've been caught each time. As for me, the person who said he would take care of the house management was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm currently living in his parents' house. He's planning to end his long-term assignment abroad this year, so we'll be planning our wedding ceremony soon. My mother and uncle, who helped us out, will be invited to the wedding. Of course, we will not invite Bob and Jane.